Citrus.
Regional Life 68.
Oh, okay. And as I understand it, Floral City is also on the Black Heritage Site for Florida. It's one of the, if not the.
Yeah, there's two sites.
There he is. Hi, Jim.
Good to see you.
Good to see you too. She's not coming. Nancy Kennedy just told me that she cannot come. She's having car trouble. So thank you for joining us. Yeah, I guess she's not coming, right? So I will get us started. No, you don't have to. You want to?
Run my computer.
I'll introduce myself.
And this is the on-off button if you need to. It's turned on here. It is battery operated, so if you have any issues with the batteries, just let me know if you have backup.
Okay.
It's on now, is that right?
Hello, everyone. Ooh, I'm a little loud, I guess. I'm Donna Lucas, president of the Afro-American Club of Citrus County. It's my distinct honor to welcome you all to the Old Courthouse. It's the Heritage Museum, and it's in Inverness, as you know, and we are celebrating Black History Month 2022. Tonight, we feature some of the stories from longtime African-American residents in Citrus County. According to the census, African Americans currently make up 3.2% of the population in this county. I see some people nodding. Back in the early 1900s, however, there was a thriving Black community, 2,600 people, nearly half of the total population of 5,400. By 1980, the number of African Americans had dwindled to 1,800, while the overall population soared to almost 55,000. So being from a different area, being from Chicago, I haven't been here in a long time, maybe 5 years, but I wanted to learn the history of this area, and this is a perfect opportunity for me and also for you. Maya Angelou, the renowned American poet and writer, reminded us that we are duty-bound to share our memories, preserve our history, and honor our ancestors. So we gather here today to preserve these stories for the next generation. I believe this program is being taped, so that the information will be in the museum. So, the first person I want to introduce is Cheryl Danley. She's property owner. She has quite a bit of property here in Floral City. Then we will talk to Joyner. She's an educator from Crystal River. And then Bailey Wise, one of the founders of our 33-year-old Afro-American Club of Citrus County. Each panelist will share their stories for 15 minutes, maybe 20. We will hear from the first two speakers, take a brief intermission, and then we will end up with Bailey Wise. Please jot down and hold your questions until the end of the program. You'll then have an opportunity to both ask questions, and at the end, we have quite a few artifacts up here that you can come and take a look at. So first, I will introduce Cheryl Danley. Tell us your story.
Thank you, Donna. Can you hear me? It's a bit loud. Okay, I'm Cheryl, and I live in the Floral City area in what was once called Russell Hill. It was the rural African American community. And my mother was born there. I just moved there in September. My mother told me, and also the journalist Steve Arthur in the Citrus County Chronicle several years ago, that there used to be 300 African Americans living in that community when she was a child. And this is an area that is near the border of Citrus County and Hernando County, so many of the African Americans there in the rural area also were considered Brooksville residents. And I know that when I was a child, we actually said it was Brooksville because that was what the postal address was. All my life growing up until the 80s, he said we were going to Brooksville because it was Route 2, Box 292, Brooksville. And then when they changed the jurisdiction, it became Floral City. And at the time, there were no street names, and so they were looking for suggestions for street names. And so my dad went there and said, well, what about our name, Danley Point? Now, mind you, my father married into the family. He didn't suggest his father-in-law's name, which would have been probably the better thing to do. His father-in-law was R.L. Collins, and it was R.L. who had been born there, and it was R.L. Collins' grandfather who got the land as a homestead grant through President Benjamin Harrison in 1891. And I learned about this after both my parents passed away, looking through some artifacts. We found the old title search for the property, and it actually shows the transcript from 1891 to Gillum Washington, who was our great-great-grandfather. So I will share with you the way I learned things. Most of this came about recently when I decided to move here and to look through different documents that we found. So I mentioned the article from the Citrus Chronicle that had the history of Russell Hill. Then there was also another article in the very in the very bottom, there's a photograph of Gillum Washington, and it showed that he used to work at Chinsagut Hill with Fielder Harris. And so as soon as I arrived, I went to Chinsagut Hill and went to one of the historical tours that they had there. And the most interesting thing happened. One of the guest speakers there was a descendant of Anderson Mayo, and I learned that Anderson Mayo was the plantation owner that was actually the person where our great-great-grandmother was enslaved on his plantation. And so we had some records that were also part of my mother's documents, and it showed that her daughter, Easter Heath, the woman who was on the Anderson Mayo plantation, was the mother of Francis Washington, who married Gillum Washington, and he was the one that got the land grant here. And so it's been a kind of journey of learning so much about my family history that's been very interesting to me. And I also have been able to visit some of the cemeteries to see where some of the different people have been buried and to learn a little bit more. The other thing that I found out were some of the relatives who were descendants from the Anderson Mayo plantation live still in Brooksville, and some of them have done the ancestry and showed me the flow charts of the different family members that were my ancestors. So Donna has asked me to talk a little bit about the history and about what my grandparents did. My grandfather was a farmer and rancher most of his life. R.L. Collins was also a worker on the Ferris Groves, citrus groves. In addition, he used to drive the bus for the few African-American communities that were in the area. When my mother was a child, they had a one-room schoolhouse and only a few grades for the colored children, so she could only go to school up to grade 6 at the time. She was born in 1932. And so then my grandfather was always very active and sort of demanding things that he thought were due him and due the community. And so at the time he petitioned to have an opportunity for his children to go to higher education. And so at the time, before they built the high school, the colored high school, he was taking my mother and her siblings to school, and eventually there was a bus that was for all of the 5 colored communities in Citrus County, and I believe that the high school that they built is where the current middle school is now in Floral City. Is that right? It used to be the Booker T. Washington High School. My mother didn't benefit in time because by the time they got that policy, it was, I guess, my uncle, who was her younger brother, was able to take advantage of that. And so my mother had to go to school in Ocala for a boarding school and then go to St. Petersburg because there were no high schools for colored children at that time.
How did you get from your place to Ocala?
It was a boarding school. My parents...
So they stayed.
Yeah, they took her there. So in order for her to have a higher education, and I'll just say one last thing maybe before passing it on, the expectations were not very much for the African-American children then. My grandmother, in addition to being a hairdresser, also worked as a domestic for someone. And when my mom was about to graduate from high school, she, the woman who employed my grandmother just assumed that my mother would go and work when she finished high school. And then my grandmother said, "Oh no, my daughter's going to college." She went to Florida A&M University, and at that point, the woman immediately fired my grandmother because, you know, she felt, well, you don't need my job. I mean, women in general, black or white, weren't really going to college that much from this area then. So I think that they thought that there was, you know, too much ambition coming from the Collins family. But you had some other questions?
I had another question, yes. So your people owned how much? 80? They own 80 acres now in Floral City, is that correct?
Currently, we have 80 acres. The original Homestead Act was for 160 acres.
Okay.
And the Homestead Act was enacted during Abraham Lincoln's time, and many people got land. It was a quarter of a square mile, 160 acres, and they had to homestead it for 5 years in order to be granted that land. And at the time, I think up to about 14% of all rural land was owned by African Americans at that time, and now there's only 1% of all farmers are African American.
Cheryl, how have things changed since you've been back?
Well, I've only been back since September, so I spent my first year of life here in Floral City because when my mom was a teacher in St. Petersburg, when actually I was born in Nashville, Tennessee, when my dad was in school there, but my mom and dad met and moved to St. Petersburg where my mother was teaching, but she needed help taking care of me, so she brought me to my grandparents here in Floral City. So I stayed there from the first and second year of my life, and as my grandfather used to say, when your mother brought you here, you couldn't even hold up your head. And by the time you started calling me daddy, that's when she came and got you. So that kind of gives you an idea of my age at the time. And we used to come, of course, every year. And then my mother and father, sort of during their retirement years, were snowbirds. And so they would come down in the winter and stay. And then after my father passed, I'd drive down with my mother. She would stay with the car. And then I'd fly back. And then I would fly back in the spring and drive back up with her.
Are you planning to stay?
Yes.
Good. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Okay, so next we have Ray Joyner. She's an educator from Crystal River.
Good afternoon. I am here not on my own will, but Mr. Jim Anderson from Homosassa, the printing shop, someone or somebody has been talking to him because he did not know me and I did not know him. But he asked me to come to be on this panel. And I said, well, I've had 3 strokes and I don't remember well. He said, don't give me that. He said, I've had people to tell me that you are doing well and that you were at the Afro-American Club a few weeks ago and you spoke and they said you were fine. So I said, well, I don't drive anymore. He said, okay, that's okay. I said, well, I can't come. What time is it? He said, 6 to 8. I said, oh, I can't make it then. But I did not know he had gone behind my back and set up with Mr. Ted Holmes to come to my house, pick me up, bring me here, and have me on the panel. So I said, well, my husband is going to bring me. I said, because I've talked to him, and he said that he was coming. He said, you sure? I said, yeah. He said, because he told me I had to get you here. I said, don't worry. My husband will get me here. I'll be there, so I'm here. And the other thing I said to him, I don't know that much about Crystal River. He said, you've been there over 50 years. You ought to know something. I said, okay. What I know about is what I know from 1964 he said, then talk about that. That's what I said, oh, I can do that. He said, well, that's what you do. So I'm here to talk about 1964 when I arrived. How I got here is surprising to me. My director of education at Florida A&M University came to me and said, I need to speak to you after class today. I said, okay. I said, what about? He said, just come and see me and I'll tell you. So I walked into his office and he said, hi, how are you? I said, oh, I'm fine. I said, what you want with me? He said, listen, I got a call from Citrus County, and they asked me if I had anyone graduating in early childhood education. And I told them yes. And she said, her name was Mrs. Brown. She said to him, well, I need someone. He said, I got somebody for you. He said, so I recommended you. I said, wait a minute. Where is this? Because I did not want to come to a small town to teach. I wanted to go to a big city. So I said, well, where is this? He said, oh, it's in Crystal River. I said, I've never heard of Crystal River. He said, wait a minute, let me get the map and show it to you on the map. So he went and he got a map. And he looked and I said, you can't find it? He said, on this map, I guess it's not on this map. Come back tomorrow and I'll show it to you. I said, listen, don't waste your time. I don't want to go to anywhere that small. He said, but she wants you. I said, she doesn't even know me. It's your recommendations. So I left his office. 2 days later, she called me. I didn't answer the phone because I knew it's got to be a small town. So 3 or 4 days later, I got a letter from her. I didn't answer it. Then I saw him in the hall a week later, and he said, did you call Mrs. Brown? I said, no, sir. I told you I did not want to go to a small town. So I graduated and went home. My mom said, are you looking for a job? I said, yes, I'm looking for a job. She said, well, I certainly hope you find one by the time school year comes. I said, oh, I'll find one. But what I had not told my mother was I had a friend down in Miami, and he had told me about applying for a job there. I said, oh, okay. So 2 or 3 weeks passed, and I hadn't gotten a call, and I was still waiting. So I went off from home. And when I came back, my mom was like, "Oh, I'm so happy. I said, "What you happy about?" She said, "I found you a job." I said, "You found me a job? Where?" She said, "Listen, Dr. Cunningham called me, and he said that they have been trying to get in touch with you about a job." I said, "Mother dear, I don't want it. It's a small town. I want to go to a big town." She said, "Well, I'm sorry. I have accepted that job for you. And we are going Monday to Crystal River." I said, "Mother dear, I don't even know where Crystal River is." She said, "Well, I've gotten in touch with your uncle, and we have drawn it all out, and we are going to Crystal River Monday." I said, "Let me tell you something. When I get there, it's my job, my decision. If I don't want it, I'm going to tell her no." She said, "No, you're not. I have accepted that job for you." I said, "Well, okay." So we started driving to Crystal River. My family did not know where Crystal River was, and we rode, and we rode, and we rode, and all we saw was trees, bushes, trees. I said, "Mother dear, when we get to the office, I want to tell her I don't want to work there." She said, "You're going to take that job." I said, "I got to take this job. Oh my goodness." So we went into the office, and we sat there for a few minutes. The minute we got into the office, the lady said, "Mrs. Jones, I was your supervisor in Highlands County 10 years ago." "Where was I?" She said, "Marguerite, is that you?" My mom said, "Oh, yes." Then she said, if you are anything," talking to me, "like your mom, I want you." I said, my mama touching my foot under the table. I said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, "Well, the only thing is we have an opening here in Inverness, and we have the one in Crystal River." She said, "We want you to take the one in Crystal River because it's a new school." What I care about a new school at that time? I said, "Well, how far is that from here?" She said, "Oh, it's about 17 miles. 17 miles. She said, "Yes." She said, "When we finish here and you sign your contract, then your parents can take you to Crystal River." I signed the contract. I didn't want to, but I signed it. She said, "You're going to be happy here." I said to myself, "Yeah, I bet." So we got back in the car, and my mom said, "Which way to Crystal River?" I said, "I don't know." So she stopped and asked a few people, and they told, "You go straight down that road there and keep driving, and you'll get to Crystal River." Well, we started out. During that time, from here to Crystal River, it was nothing but trees. Nothing was built up like it is now. And it seems like we would never get here. We drove and I said, "Well, 17 miles, that's a long ways from here." She said, "Well, we'll be there in a few minutes." By that time, I had started crying. My mama said, "Plenty of people would be glad that they got a job, and here you sitting back there crying, and you have a job." I said, "Yeah." So then we got here, and she said, "Well, Mrs. Brown said to me that you had to find somewhere to live." "Okay, well, how we do that?" She said, "Well, we'll start asking people." So she said, "Well, where did the teachers live before?" So we stopped at a lady's house named Miss Natia. And my mother said, "Could you tell me where the teachers used to live here? I'm looking for a job for my daughter, a house for my daughter to live in." She says, she named them. We went there. No, I'm not interested. All three of them said no. So we went back to Miss Natia. And my mother said, Miss Natia, would you please take my daughter? She said, I don't want to teach her. My mom said, if you would just take my daughter and see if it'll work out. If it doesn't, I will come back and pick her up. She sat on the porch. She said, y'all hungry? My mother said, well, yeah, tell me where a restaurant is. She said, oh, there are no restaurants around here, too much for black people. So, oh my goodness. So she said, well, I've cooked, so you can have food with me. So she took us in the house and she said, man, she could cook. So I said, oh, that's nice. My mother and she was talking because I wasn't talking because I'm looking at all these woods and can't find a place to stay, and no stores, no traffic lights, no name streets, and I did not have a car. So my mother said, well, just go on and work here for the first year, and if you don't like it, you can come home and you can start looking for another job. So I said, where is the school? So Mrs. Nightingale, she said, there it is, right there. My mom said, oh, that's good because my daughter doesn't have a car, so she can walk to school. Okay. So I cried for 2 weeks until school opened because my mother brought me here. And then I started looking around, and I said, I don't see anything there. Then I started calling my mother saying, it's nothing here, it's nothing here. And then 2 weeks later, two ladies who live here carried me down to where they said black folks hung out. And we went there, and they said, Ray, just a minute, come here. That man right there, that's who they introduced me to. And when they introduced me to him, I looked at him and I said, I don't like him. So I went home, and I told Miss Natty, I said, Miss Natty, I finally met the Willie that you were talking about, and I don't like him. She said, oh, he's a sweet boy. I said, yeah, but I don't like him. So she said, well, but he's good. You'll get to like him. So about 3 weeks later, my friend called me and said, look, where are you? I said, in some little town called Crystal River, Florida. She said, oh, I know where that is. She said, look, I'll pick you up this Friday. No. She said, nothing. Do you know anyone at the school who lives in Dunellen? I said, I don't know where Dunellen is. She said, it's right there in Crystal River. If you can find someone at that school who works at Crystal River and drive to Dunellen, ask them if you could catch them over here. And I have a friend who works at Dunellen Middle School, and he can bring you to Ocala to visit with me. I said, oh, well, that's good because there's nothing here. So every Friday, I took my suitcase to school on Friday because I went to school with my suitcase, called the teacher from Crystal River to Dunellen every day. Every Friday, I went, and that went along well. Then I started working with the kids. I got along well with the kids. I got along well with the parents. In this book, it was all started before I ever came to Crystal River. But a lot of history about Crystal River is in this book. And some of the people in this book. I did not know it then, but I had been in school with them at Florida A&M, and I said that I never knew that they were from this area because we never talked about it. His sister lived on my floor. She was 3 doors down from me. I never knew it until I came here. And I said, "That's your sister?" He said, "Yes, and I used to come up there to see her." I said, "Well, I never saw you." He said, "Well, we used to do that." So I said, "Okay." So 1964 to 1966, we were called Crystal River Elementary School. Then it changed to Crystal River Primary School. And in about 4 years after it changed, integration came. Then we were Crystal River Primary School from there on. Okay, at Crystal River Primary School, integration came. The first thing we found out, which was so surprising to me, there was 2 salaries, one for the white people and one for the black people. But when integration took place, it all changed to one salary. When I was in school, we got all of the old materials from the white school that they were done with, and they sent them over to our school. But we had some very, very good teachers who not only taught from the classroom, they taught us how to live. In my room, I looked at the kids, and they were good kids, but there were some things I thought that I needed to teach, such as brushing your teeth, combing your hair, and your fingernails. And every morning, I checked fingernails, had files there for them to clean them if they weren't clean, brush their teeth if they weren't clean brushed, and I combed hair and put bows on them. Nothing happened. But when I started doing that with the white children, I started getting a little bit of repercussion from that. And explaining to them, look, I'm not trying to say that your child isn't clean. I'm just trying to teach them good habits. That's all. But if you don't want me to do your child's hair, teeth, fingernails, I don't have to. But the kids on their own would come to me and say, "May I use the file?" Yes. Whatever it was that they asked me when they saw me working with the other kids, they would ask me if they could do that. So things rocked on. I left Crystal River Primary School after 31 years of teaching. I did not know that I couldn't go right back into teaching. You had to stay out for a year. So while I was out for the year, the principal of Crystal River High School taught at my school. So she went home and told her husband. And he said, "Really?" She said, "Yes, she's there. Why don't you call her up and ask her if she'll come?" So he did call me up, and he wanted me to take a teacher's place who was having surgery. I said, "How long will she be out?" He said, "Oh, about 10, 15 days. I said, "Oh, yes, I can do that." But in that time, she passed on. So he said, "You have been with these kids this long. I hate to get someone new in here now. So would you just stay with them until I get a teacher?" I said, yeah, I'll do that. So 2 weeks passed. I went to his office. I said, have you gotten someone? No. I said, well, when you going to get someone? He said, soon. Another 2 weeks passed, and another 2 weeks. And I said, when are you going to get a teacher? He said, oh, I'm going to get one. And then the school board called him and told him, Ray needs to go to school and get certified in order to stay in this area. So when he came to me, I said, that's a good time for me to go. Now get you a teacher. He said, just stay here and wait until I get one. So I did not know that he was inviting people from the school board over to the room to see what I was doing. And they come in and they speak and they stand there for a few minutes and they would leave. He said, do you see a reason to get rid of her? No, but she has to be certified, because when these other teachers find out that she isn't certified, they're going to be upset. He said, well, who's going to tell them? I say, what? I said, man, you better try to get somebody certified. I said, because I don't want these people all over me. He said, don't worry, they won't. I stayed there for 10 years. And after that, I brought myself home, and I was sitting there, and I wasn't happy, and I'm still not happy, because my husband said to me, you don't need to work anymore, and you don't remember nothing. I said, I bet I do. He said, well, you need to stay home. So since then, I have been home and living in Crystal River, 50-some years, has brought me to this point, to where I am now. And I thank everybody who was patient with me and stayed on the prayer line, because they had to be praying for me. And I thank them. Thank you.
So, Ray, you came here to Crystal River kicking and screaming, yelling at your mother.
Yes.
But think about all the children that you helped.
Yes, and this morning, thank you for that. This morning, I nearly cried, because one of the students that I taught 40 years ago left roses at my doorstep for me, saying thank you for what you did for me.
I know there are a lot of people that have taught in the past in the audience, so you all understand what Ray said, and we appreciate your comments and your story. We're going to take a brief intermission, 10 minutes, and then we'll go on with our program. Thank you. Two people, Cheryl and another person, found out that they are related. It's good when good people get together. Okay, we're going to go on. Who was it? Tell me your name. Caressa Natil. And Cheryl. They're related. Cousins. All right, next we're going to hear from Mr. Bailey Wise, who has been here quite a while too. Was not born in this area, but he has been here quite a while, and I'm sure he has stories to tell.
Good evening. My name is Bailey Wise. As you can see that I am a very young fellow. I'll be, how you put it, 49. I'll be 59 on the 15th of March. Now, you take and turn that around. All right? I was born in a little town called Swainsboro, Georgia. I know many of you have heard of Sam Cooke. I was born by the river in a little tent. Well, I was born by the river by a railroad track. And this is where I am now, from the railroad track. I went to school until I was about 16 years of age. I migrated to West Palm Beach, Florida, and from West Palm Beach, Florida, I went to New York. That was in 1944 when I went to New York. I was inducted into the Army in New York. And before I was inducted, I worked for the Jersey City Quartermaster, which was a part of the Army at that time, but I was a civilian. I was only 17 years of age. And when we went down to be inducted into the Army, it was the day before Thanksgiving in 1945. By me living in New York, and anyone that was there at that time, they could go back home for Thanksgiving. So there were only two of us that could go back home. The rest of the guys, they were from different parts of New York City. Anyone in here know where 39 Whitehall Street is that was inducted into the service? Yes. So that's where it was. I went to Fort McClellan, Alabama for my training. I had just left out of Georgia. And only a black man know what it was to live at that time. I went from the frying pan back into the fire in Alabama. I had my 3 months training in Alabama. Then I came home for 2 weeks. They shipped me back to Blackstone, West Virginia. I was in West Virginia for about a month. Then we were put on a troop transport, and I wound up in Le Havre, France. From Le Havre, France, I went to Bremerhaven, Germany. From Bremerhaven, Germany, which was a processing station, and we were sent to a little village called Camberg, Germany. I was an MP for about 3 months in Camberg, but the main job was I was an ambulance driver. We would go on TDY for 2 or 3 months to different places that needed ambulances for the hospitals and things that was throughout Germany. And I was transferred to Gießen, Germany. And when I got to Gießen, they told me, said that your commanding officer, he's out of Arkansas. I said, oh no. So, but he called me into his office, and he said, Bailey, he said, I've looked at your record. He said, you have a good record. He said, my stamp is on the desk here. And on that stamp was, I was authorized to carry German civilians, which you know what that meant. It didn't mean that anybody just pick up that I could be with the females, if this is what it meant. So, but I got to know all the major players in the dispensary there, which was the sergeants. And at bed check, they couldn't leave the camp, but I could go in and out the camp anytime, the day or night. So they had their thing on the outside, and so I would take them after bed check to wherever they wanted to go. Before reveille, I would go back and pick them up. So at that period, there was the motor pool sergeant, the supply sergeant, the mess sergeant at all. Most soldiers was eating Spam. I was eating pork chops, steak. So, and I even had my ambulance to be repainted, new motor and everything put in it when I was there. So I had a weekend off about 3 months after that period. So I was allowed to go back to my outfit in Camberg. When I got down into the camp area, I had a siren on, and I put the siren, wow, 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 and who stepped out but my commanding officer in the ambulance company there. He looked and he saw the ambulance. He said, Private Bailey, I'm going to take that ambulance you got there. I said, no, sir. I said, you can't help that. I said, I went through too much to get it. So he told me, he said, well, good luck to you, you know. So I went, and I Stayed in Gießen for about another 8 months, say 8 months. Then I got to notice that I was going to be discharged. I was going to come home. On my return to New York, we got caught in what you call it, one of these nor'easters. It took about 3 days to come across from Germany to New York. But it took us 7 days. We got hung in a storm, and that storm stayed there. When we got into New York Harbor, that morning we had 1 cup of little watered down coffee, 1 slice of bacon and 1 slice of bread. That was all left for each soldier on the boat. I was sent to Fort Dick. I was discharged from Fort Dick. Came back to New York. No jobs to be found in the place. You going there. How many remember 5220? Nobody here know what 5220 is? Well, I can see all you guys are young fellows. When you came out of the service at that time, you got $20 a week for 52 weeks. After that, you were on your own. Every week you got $20 if you didn't have a job. So I was going from job to job. Maybe I would get a job and stay there for 3 months and I get laid off, which that was the norm at that time. They would hire you, and just when you were just at the point where you were going to become a regular, they would let you go to keep from paying you that extra $3 or $4 what was required at that time. So I worked from different little jobs. I would go back on 5220, different little job back on 5220, until I ran into one fella that I had worked with in the factory. He said, where are you working? I said, I got a little job I call Weisberger Beer Lumber Company. He said, well, Con Edison is hiring and they're hiring veterans. I said, who's Con Edison? You know, even though I've been in New York for almost 2 years, I still didn't know who Con Edison was. So he told me, and I went down, instead of me going to the job, I went down to Con Ed and applied, put an application in. Right on the spot, they hired me. They took me upstairs to one of the managers. He sat me down and had a talk. He said, why do you want to work for Con Ed? I said, man, all I want is a job. I can get a job, you know, something where I got an income coming in every week. So he said, well, you came to the right place. He said, it's not what you do when you come here, is you being here is the main thing. If you're not here, you're useless. But if you're here, that means there's something you can always do. So I worked, I'll tell you this, that was in April of 1948. I started as a laborer. We had different other job, digging ditches or whatever you want to call it, you know. And but eventually you got a little each job that you went to, it was like a step up in salary. So they asked me, did I want to work in the electric or the gas? So we manufactured gas. A lot of people don't know that the gas before 1948, if you lived in New York, it was manufactured gas. It wasn't natural gas like what you have. We didn't get natural gas in New York until I think it was 1959. It's when the government allowed that you could use natural gas. Well, I had been with Con Ed quite a while then, and they transferred me to Hunts Point. I worked in Hunts Point for about 4 years. Then they transferred me back to Astoria and at the plant there. So then I got a call say, well, they got this gas from the government. Now we're going to demolish all the gas plants. But by me working for the gas company, it was all combined and owned by one company. The electric and the gas was owned by Con Edison. I worked the different jobs, and they told me, say, well, there was an Irish guy, I'll never forget him, his name was Pete Donlin. He came to me, he said, Bailey, he said, they're going to change the rules and you're being advanced in the company. Say, before it used to be just seniority. But he said, now it's going to be seniority plus qualifications. So I said, yeah. He said, now you are on the list. You're number 3 on the list to go to the control room. I had worked from a laborer to the highest job where all the contracts was negotiated from. I had reached that point. The next step was the control room. That's when segregation started to pop in. The control room was lily white. Do you understand what I'm saying? Was only one black guy there in the control room. Now I'm in a position to come up. We begin to break that line. They say the glass ceiling. There's a crack in the glass ceiling. And so they told me there were 2 guys ahead of me. All right. Now, that what they called, we had a preferential list that was step by step. As the control room, there were 5 A operators, there were 10 B operators. The A operator was in charge of the control room. So my turn came to go up. I didn't know the time was there. So I was off the weekend, and one of the guys that was ahead of me, his locker was right beside mine in the locker room. So I came in that afternoon, and he said, Bailey, say you and me, and I'm you now. I said, yeah, Tom, yeah, okay. I didn't know what he was talking because I had been off the weekend. So he said, no, he said, you don't understand what I'm telling you. I said, no. He said, I turned down going to the control room and Jimmy Lindsay also turned it down. You are the one that's going to go up to start to break in and the control room. Well, I had did boiler operations before, you know. So when I went over, we had like what they say, people like most people say to punch a time card. I never punched the time card at Con Ed. Your relief was your time clock. So I went upstairs to the up in the control room there. Our card was in the rack up there, and as I was putting my 8 on the card for the shift, you know, it was shift work, the phone rang, and the foreman there said, Bailey Tom wants to talk to you. I said, oh yeah, okay now. He said, Bailey, come down to the second floor office. So okay, I don't know what's happening. I go down to the second floor office, and he says, Bailey, I know that you're supposed to start breaking in the control room today. He said, but you're not going to start breaking in. I said, no, why not? He said, Steve Mack said that he was never asked to go to the control room. I said, Tom, I said, you know that's a lie. I said, number one, this preferential list has been out for 3 years. Nobody complained about anything until now. But come to find out, it wasn't so much where Steve Mack didn't want to go. In a sense, he was forced to go. Our co-chairman of our union, one of the guys down there, I was telling him about different things about boiler operation, because that's where he was going to go next. And he told me what was happening. He said, Frank Orby was here over at Steve Mack over there for 3 days, pounding on him to take that job. You see, because now that job, from the job that I had to the B job, which I would be going to break into, would have been the B job. And that job, that was about a 45 a week difference in pay. Do you understand what I'm saying here now? It's a matter of being a mechanic and a control room operator B. It was about $45 difference in pay between a week in the salary. So I got, you know, well, I got pissed off, you know, it wasn't going to be easy, you know. So my first thing, I turned around and I went up to the main office, which was on the 5th floor. I wanted to see the coordinator. He wasn't no place to be found. All right.
Bailey, can you tell us about Crystal River? You know,
I'm coming to Crystal River when I came down here. Yeah, I'm coming down here. We talk. What the main thing is the difference. I'm coming to the difference in New York and the difference down here.
Yeah.
All right. I came back the next day to catch him. He wasn't there. I said, well, I know what I'll do. I'll come back at 12 o'clock. I know he'll be there. I came back, and we got into a confrontation between the two of us there, and he said, well, you didn't come to me in the beginning. What are you coming to me now for? I said, but that's between union and management who does this. It wasn't me. So as I went on to say, well, he said, well, you'll be going up there quicker than you think. I said, yeah, I know I'm going, and I'll qualify when I go. To jump from that job to the next job, it was 18 months. You had to be on the job, 8 to learn and training for that job, because you got so much equipment and stuff that's involved in it. And so I went up 2 weeks later. Steve was up 2 weeks before me. I went up and I was there this particular night, and the general foreman got a call from the system. That means the whole system around in New York there, that he had to have 2 units on. I told this guy, I said, well, you take number 6, the boiler, and I'll take number 5. I went and I took that boiler from a cold standstill and put it in, worked up and put it on automatic and worked it so it would go into the system. And the next morning, when I was getting ready to go home, the phone rang. It was the general. He said, Bailey, he said, you're qualified, come in tomorrow on overtime. You got overtime tomorrow, come in. I said, huh? He said, yeah, you've been qualified. Everyone had the right to have a form that they had to fill out. I didn't have to fill out anything. He watched me from the time when I put that boiler on until we synchronized it to the bus. I worked for Con Ed from 1948 to 1989. 1989, we migrated to
Crystal River.
not Crystal River, but Beverly Hills.
Beverly Hills, Citrus County.
So I came down, and it was just at the time when the Afro-American Club, we were getting ready to start it.
And you were one of the founders.
I was at that time, yeah. So I told them that I wanted no part of just a social club. I say, well, if we're going to do anything, then we need to do something for the community. So Clifford Darren was the first president of the Afro-American Club. I was the second. I told them only one condition would I take it was that I would have to have at least 2 years to put a program together there. That's when the bylaws and things were changed and was made to 2 years.
Did you see any difference between, you said you were in New York and you wanted to tell us the difference between New York and down here in Citrus County?
All right, the difference is, I'm quite sure if you're from New York, you knew about the Teresa Hotel. All right. And those know about the Teresa Hotel, know about Refuge Temple. Well, this Sunday, we've been to church. This old lady, I know you've seen these people with got that big hump in the back and they're bent over. So her name was Mother Bowles. I went to, my car was parked on 125th Street. I had to drive the car around to the back, come around 123rd Street to come up to go up on the uptown side to by where the church was. And she was standing there. Well, at that time on a Sunday, the traffic was quite heavy, people. And the reason why I say the difference between, it wasn't just Beverly Hills, but it was New York and the South, is what I'm putting, is that I double parked the car to go over to help this old lady to take her home. And this cop in New York. Move it! I said, I'm going to get the lady. She was about as far as over as to the wall there. And I had to go around to go to get her. Of course, she couldn't walk, so I said, well, I'm going to get her. He said, move it! And I looked, and that was the first time, I think, that I ever got angry enough that I wanted to kill someone. And the difference is, it wasn't a white cop. Do you understand what I'm saying? This is what, it wasn't a white cop. Now, to get back to what I said about the South, we were in Pinehurst, North Carolina, playing golf. I was speeding, going to the golf club. I run into the trooper. I saw him spin around, I pulled my car over. He came up, and I don't know how many really Southerners that you have in here that he had that Southern drawl. He said, driver's license registration, please. So I went in my wallet and got it out. He said, go around and get on the other side of the car, on his car. I went around, got in the car, and in the meantime, he had punched in my driver's license. So he said, Mr. Wise, where you going in such a hurry this morning? I said, well, I told him my reason. He said, you know, if I give you a ticket, I'm going to have to take your license, give you a card to go back, you can drive the car back to New York. You're going to have to come back down and go to the court. I said, oh, no. He said, I see you getting ready to retire. I said, yeah, now I'll be retiring in about 3 years. So he said, Mr. Wise, you think if I let you go, you can keep this Buick under for the 35-mile-an-hour speed zone? I said, I sure can. He was a corporal in Pinehurst, North Carolina. He was white. Do you understand where I'm coming from? It's not so much about all blacks are good and all whites are bad. You got it's on both sides. And when we got down here in Beverly Hills, we had the club where you're seeing the pictures, some of the pictures that we had about what we did before that. Right up here where Regions Bank used to be, on the corner right here, they're putting a car wash or something there now. Right there on the corner with 41 and 44 split.
Yes.
Well, we had established the club we just had started about 2 years. They had a meeting in the bank there. We were going to start, with our scholarship that we had. So Gene Thompson and I, which became the next president of the club, we went to the meeting. And so different companies was coming up and they were saying, we give $50 from this company, $50, and it came down to us. I said, we are only about 8 or 9 people that was in the club. I said, but we are donating $500 towards this scholarship. The difference of $500 to $50. So with the club, it progressed, as I told you before, that I told them I wanted no parts of the social club. If we were going to do something for the Well, our first recipient for the scholarship was Linda Virgil. She became manager of Winn-Dixie in Beverly Hills then. And she wasn't our choice, our first choice. Who in here remember Hall's automobile dealership that was it's a black-owned, many of you don't know, but it was a black-owned dealership there in Homosassa there. Well, his son had the highest marks. He had the highest qualifications, but he didn't have the need. Linda, she came in second, but she had the need. And so that's when we decided to go with her because of the need. And as Ms. Joyner was saying, is that the way it was when I first come down here, if I got into Ocala and coming up 200, if I run into 5 or 6 cars, it was like the Long Island Expressway, you know? that's how it was. There was nothing there, you know?
But you were still speeding.
That was in Pinehurst, North Carolina. I was still speeding. But what I would like to say is that I have seen our organization from the beginning to now. And now I'm so proud of where it have come. A few years ago, they wanted to change it to the Afro-American. So, no, I told them, no, this is what we named it from the beginning. And I would fight to keep that name. And so they agreed to keep the name. But I'm so glad that I look at faces in here now that I've known for quite a while. But there's only 3 of us left that's in it. Gene Thompson, Leela Derry, and myself.
And we thank you so much for starting the organization. I'm going to open it up for questions now of all of our panelists. It's 7:30, so we have a microphone. Lindsay? We have a microphone that we're going to set up here so that you can ask questions of the panelists. Can you, he cannot get up.
It might be easier to bring.
Yeah, let's use this mic. Can we have that, Bailey?
You can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yes.
We don't need no mic.
Well, you can have it if you want it. Yeah, we are recording this, so it would be good to get your question.
Okay. My name is Clarence Redd. I'm originally from New York, and we moved to Long Island. And from Long Island, we moved down here in Crystal River in 1994, 95. Anyway, when I came down here, I had been a firefighter, volunteer in New York for about 25 years. And I joined the one down here in Crystal River. With the experience and all, before I knew it, they had made me, they elected me chief of the fire department in Crystal River. I'd just like to say something in reference to my initiation of meeting Mrs. Joyner. I was on a call in Crystal River. I think it was a storefront, and it had about 3 or 4 stores there, and someone had set a fire in one of the stores, or they left a burner burning in there, and it burned up the room pretty good. I had a couple of guys on the hose line, and they were trying to put the fire out. In fact, they had knocked it down pretty good. And then one of the fellows dropped his hose line, and he yelled out, "That's Mrs. Joyner." I don't know who the hell Mrs. Joyner is, but I said, "Boy, you better get back on that line." He said, and then another fellow came over and he said, "That's our teacher. She used to teach us in school many years ago." And now these are grown men now. And he said, "That's Mrs. Joyner." And I'm telling him, "Put the damn fire out first," you know? And that's how I got to know who Mrs. Joyner was. I had another call, a medical call, a medical emergency. Went on this call, and we picked this lady up in Crystal River, and we're on our way to the hospital, and the gentleman that was in the rig with me, he was a tech, and he said, "Do you know who that is?" I said, "Nope." He said, "That's Mrs. Joyner." So I said, "I have no idea who Mrs. Joyner is. I heard about her before." I said, "That's Mrs. Joyner. She is a legend around here." Mrs. Joyner, I would like to let you know that I have loved you from the first time I didn't know you, Mrs. Joyner.
Any other questions that we have for any of the panelists? No? Okay. Can you?
I don't need a mic.
They went today.
I'm sorry, I don't remember the first lady's name, the first speaker.
Cheryl.
Cheryl, you came back here from where?
Prior to COVID, I was living in Michigan.
Michigan, okay, all right.
And I was in the Washington, D.C. area for the last couple of years.
Okay, so you've come from the north back to the south. Let's compare the differences. What do you find here? What do you like here? What makes you want to stay here?
Well, I want to stay because I have a family legacy that I am very proud to honor, because very few African Americans have land. In fact, very few people have land. You know, of the 1/4, I guess, of the people who were granted a homestead in the country in the early or the mid 1800s till now, very few of them still have that land, and very few African Americans still have that land. And so I want to be able to preserve this memory for the next generation. I don't have any children, but I have lots of nieces and nephews and cousins. And when I got back, the main thing I wanted to do was to have a family reunion, which I did. I arrived in September. By Thanksgiving, I had 80 people come from all over New York, New Jersey, Washington, Texas, Michigan, and it was just wonderful because they didn't know about the history. It had been a few generations since our family had done this. When my parents built the house initially in the 80s, they used to host an annual family reunion Thanksgiving for about 10 years or so. And after my mom passed in 2019, all of the cousins said, we need to do better. We need to get back to this. And I think that if my great-great-grandfather was able to maintain the homestead with all of the racial violence that was happening in the area at that time, and my own grandfather was able to persevere and maintain the land, then the least I can do is to carry it forward to the next generation.
Ms. Joyner, this isn't a question, this is a statement, which I already know you know the answer to, but God knew what he was doing.
I have a question for you, Ms. Joyner. You headed up the Girls and the Boys Club. You see how I said Girls and the Boys Club in Crystal River. Was that a help to the community? And if so, why is there none now?
Okay. My husband and
Can you hear?
This is,
thank you. My husband and 3 other guys got together and said that we needed a Boys and Girls Club in Crystal River somewhere for the kids to go. They put the money together to get the charter for Crystal River for us to have a Boys and Girls Club there. And time moved on, and other people came in and was helping them, and the committee said that they needed to hire someone else in the club to make sure that it still went on. And I was in that meeting, and they asked me to leave, and I left, and they tried to make me be the assistant director until they hired someone to direct the club. And the committee said, no, why not? Why not let Ms. Joyner have it? But for some reason, they said, well, what we'll do, we'll put it out there and let people apply for the job, because Mrs. Joyner is not trained in helping kids who had problems. So they took the direction of the group, and they hired they put 3 of us to put applications in for the job. So we did, and I hadn't heard anything, and I hadn't heard anything, and I hadn't heard anything, and one of the board members called me and said, has anyone called you or told you anything? I said, no, I'm still waiting. They said, well, we'll see about that. So they did finally call me, and she said, Ray, I cannot choose one of you from your application because both of you are highly qualified, but you don't have the training that she has in taking care of children with problems. So I said, oh, okay. So I came on home and I told my husband about it. He said, well, that's okay. I guess she got who she wanted. So the kids asked, where is Mrs. Joyner? And she told them, oh, we've hired someone else to take care of you. So the kids said, we want Ms. Joyner back. They said, you can't do that. So she came into work, and Todd was in that program, and he and I worked there together. And one day, I came home, and she called my house 3 or 4 times. I said, what you want with me? I went in, and she said, oh, Mrs. Joyner. I said, oh, wait a minute. Oh, what's going on? I said, with you addressing me like that, what's going on? I don't know why. She quit. She put the keys in the drawer, and she's gone. I said, really? The lady with all the qualifications? Yes. I said, well, I'm not interested. Thank you very much. So Then it rocked on for a little while, and then they decided to move it out on to Mable Bright. Then that's when they found out all black children couldn't come because there was no way to get there. So that's why it is where it is now. But in the meeting last Wednesday, the young man told us they're trying to bring it back in this area and try to find a way how the black kids can get to it. And I asked them, please, put me on the committee, because I want to know what's going on.
She's going to join the YMCA, and that will help for the kids in that community to be able to get to the Y.
I just want to, I could probably stand to say it. I just wanted to acknowledge the number of scholarships that the African-American Club has given out. And you might, if you don't have that information, I know that there's a lot of members here. And so I also want to say that, you know, they have been given out to kids from all backgrounds and all races. And a lot of times the African-American Club does not get the recognition in terms of how much has been actually dispersed. So if you could just...
$130,000 over the last 33 years. And it all started with Bailey and his cohorts with $500. So I think we're moving on. Yeah.
Quite a way.
Quite a way. Anybody else have questions, remarks? Yes, over there.
I watch a program on TV, public TV. How many of you are aware of Finding Your Roots?
Yes.
How many? Well, anyway, I would strongly urge you all. It's by Henry Gates, and he does searches of roots in the DNA of many people. He happens to be black. Many of the people who he has on are black, and many are white. And I think you would find it most interesting.
It comes on the PBS station. I'm not sure what the station here is in Inverness, but you could also try Ancestry.com to personally find your roots. Yes. Channel 3? Was there another question?
No, right here.
Okay.
I didn't know if anyone wanted to comment on the current status of race relations in Citrus.
I haven't been here long enough to comment on it. Cheryl has just gotten to this area. September, you're where the meeting. Do you want to comment?
I would say something. Well, I look at the race relationships that we have now compared to when I first came down here. There was a conflict between Beverly Hills and our crime watch system that's in Beverly Hills there. And we eventually had to go before the county commissioners about this incident that was happening there. And the one that participated with the African American Club was Dorsey, Sheriff Dorsey. He wasn't a sheriff then. He was working as a volunteer firefighter in Beverly Hills there. But he was the one that came with us before the commissioners to because a grievance had been put up wherein that they had a basketball court on the back of the Crime Watch building. That's right there, right in back of where the park, where we go have our club meeting at now. There was a conflict between the black boys in Crystal River, the white girls in Beverly Hills. So the guy that brought the complaint up, when we went before the commissioners, he didn't show. So, but Dorsey was there with us all the time. And eventually, to make sure that this wasn't going to happen anymore, they took the hoops down to make sure that it wouldn't happen again. But all of this, there's several things that happen here that, you know, I was accustomed to it and I wasn't accustomed to it because I had lived in both places. I've seen the difference between the relationships. As you saw in the paper, what I said that down here they would tell you, say, no, you can't do that, this, that, and the other. But in the North, they would pat you on the back and stick a knife in your back and at the time. So that's why I said that there's good and there's bad on both sides.
Okay. You asked the elephant in the room question. I have been here for 5 years. I think that race relations, we're slowly making progress. A case in point is the new publisher that just came to the Chronicle. The new publisher has a different attitude about covering news. I come out of a journalistic background. I was up in Chicago working with PBS. And when I first came down here, I hardly ever saw anything about African-American people, hardly ever. Since she's taken over in the last 2 months, it has gone way up in terms of the print that I've seen. So I would say that things are gradually getting better, just based on my experience in the last 5 years. But we have a long way to go.
Yes. Yes.
Anybody else? Yes.
I have, to answer her question, I was born and raised in Citrus County, and race relations in Citrus County during my time was not really bad. There was a rift between the blacks and the whites, but it wasn't like in the big city, maybe because it's a small community. We all grew up knowing each other. But I grew up when I had to go, my grandmother worked at a restaurant, it's called Wonder Inn. You had to go in the back, that's where we went, in the back of the restaurant. And to me, at that time, it was normal. We had 2 restaurants, we had the Wonder Inn where my grandmother worked, and we had Randy Jones, where I think AJ's restaurant is there now. And those we ate in the back. I thought it was normal because that's the way I grew up. My brother was a truck driver, and it was bad, but it wasn't bad. He took us on rides sometimes. He would take me and my sister with him. And we went to this place, it was in Georgia. And they had a water fountain. They had 2 actually. One pearly white one, and one green. I mean, looked like they never washed it. And this one said, whites only. I asked my brother, I said, well, why is that? He said, because they don't clean the black ones up. And I don't know why some blacks never cleaned it. They just assumed that that's where we left it. That's the way things were. But in Citrus County, it was bad, and it wasn't that bad. You know, everybody, there's conflict everywhere you went. And being black and being black female, I guess I probably saw it differently. The guys have different experience than the females. I've had when you walk in the door, and this was back a long time ago. You walk in the door and they see you coming, white person see you coming, that the door slam in your face. I go to the door and go slam in my face. I had that same experience about 3 months ago. It changed, it evolved, and what it's changed, but it's still staying the same. It's moving forward, race relationship is moving forward, but I say slowly. It still needs fixing, there's still things wrong. I deal with a lot of white people, and that's what, I'm in the community, but that's what I do, and you see it. They say things that, I'm talking about white people, they say things that I guess they feel not offensive, but the first thing they do, they want to come and say, well, can I touch your hair? No, you cannot touch my hair. I don't know touching your hair. They don't realize the impact that is. It's just that it's different. The more things change, the more things stay the same. And that's all.
Thank you very much.
I'm glad she brought up the elephant in the room because I was too chicken.
I can't hear
My
you.
question is,
She said she's glad that she brought up the elephant in the room.
I'm glad she brought up the elephant in the room because I was afraid to. My question is, what can the white community do, those of us that are here tonight and want to make race relations better? What opportunities are there for us to join in? What can we do to support your community? It's all our community. There she goes, one of those white people things, right? Sorry.
Just a minute. I just wanted to address that. The fact that you're here says a lot to me. The fact that you came out to hear Black history during Black History Month says a lot, because Black history is American history. Janet.
In saying that, we have a lot of things that are going on in the state of Florida that I think a lot of people don't agree with.
Yes.
And I think that when we start to hear these bills going forth about race relations and what can be taught in schools and what books can be used in schools, I think everybody has to speak up and say that is not what we're about. That's not what we want. If we keep blocking out history because we're afraid that we might offend someone, it's real history that needs to be taught. And so whether it's history or some of these other bills, as a community, we have to stand up and say that's not what we're about.
The young lady asked before what could we do to make the race relations better. It's as simple as 1, 2, 3. Be fair. Just be fair. Don't expect from me what you're not willing to do for me. As simple as that. Just be fair. That's all I have to say.
Okay. Yes. You want to be recorded, so where are y'all?
Good evening, everyone. First, I want to really thank the panel, and I really want to thank the Afro-American Club for actually sponsoring this evening. My name is Dr. B. J. I'm with the Health Department, and when people talk about what can you do, I want to get specific, because all this general. Thank you so much.
Where are you from?
I live in the city of Hernando.
I came here, but I was born and raised in Orlando. My husband, my king, my earthly king, was gracious enough to follow me around the country for 10 years until I was waiting on him to say where we would live. So from Dallas, Texas to Melbourne, Florida to Miami, and then an opportunity at Citrus Memorial Hospital came up. And I said, oh boy, I'm a nurse and I'm an informaticist. If you don't know what that is, you can look it up. Or you can ask me later. But at any rate, on our drive in, I said, oh, what beautiful countryside. I never even knew where Citrus County was, and I live right in Orange County. Took the job, and I knew, because I did my homework, 3% black. We got here one night, first thing we saw were beautiful deer, and I thought, oh wow, this is really cool. I said, honey, we gotta go find some black people. So off we went to Walmart, and sure enough, black people. And anyone that knows me knows I'm very outgoing. I work with the health department, and the area that I work in has to do with vaccinations and COVID. And I found that as an opportunity to get to know my community, that I could go out to churches, because I work with the faith-based, and I could actually engage people, and I can get rid of some misnomers and help people really understand what's going on, because we, the minority, tend to be left behind. So I'm out there educating, and I'm having a good time. So I'm thinking, I tried to retire at age 70, and God said, not yet. You're going to go to the health department, you're going to volunteer. But they said they paid me. I said, all right, this is great. And now, with COVID improving, I said, now what, God? Because I know you're not going to let me sit down. And it was that a grant came through, 2 grants actually. One of the grants is for health equity. So you can't tackle, one person or a group can't tackle everything, but all of us can do something. So we're working with health equity, and we're also working with health disparities, the things that are keeping us from having that equity. In doing so, there's a small amount of money, but some big voices. And when we approach you in the community, what I'd like to hear is yes, because this is where I live, this is where I work, and even knowing it was 3% African American, I said, as long as I can find 1 or 2 of you, I'm gonna be all right. But what has really happened is people like you, all of you, have just come to my aid to help me in my project. April is Minority Health Month. The Board of County Commissioners has accepted a challenge to put health in every policy. And since the minorities are the smallest percent of people, but we tend to have the more severe outcomes for diseases and early deaths, that's where we're working. So when you hear about that, just join us. Help us, help ourselves, and help you. Because the more we do for each other, and we're all in this together. I am so glad my husband said Citrus County, because I've lived in New York and DC and all those places, Saudi Arabia, and this is home. This is where I want to be, and I love being here, and I just love y'all. I'm just having a good time. So be on the lookout, though, for any notifications about health equity, health disparities, and help us with those grants, okay?
We're going to close the meeting now, but I want to thank the panel and the audience for such candid conversation. I mean, we're all living in Citrus County. We all love it here. There are some things that need to be done, but I really appreciate the comments that were made tonight, and I appreciate the museum, the Heritage Museum, for having us here. Jim Anderson, who came up with this idea, although he told me not to mention his name, but I'm going to do it anyway. I have the mic. So thank you all for coming out. We'll be here for a few minutes if you have other questions of us here at the podium, and we have some artifacts that you might want to take a look at. And we'd also encourage people to join the Afro-American Club of Citrus County. We do a lot of things for the community, and we can do so much more. Thank you.
Got to stretch.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sweetie.
Oh, Lord, I'm so glad.
Hello.
How you doing? My name is Earl Carter.
Carlos.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That was great.